Award-winning poet and author Rachel Eliza Griffiths is only on CBS here to debut her new novel, Promise. It has been called, quote, stunning portrait of love, pride, and survival. It tells the story of two Black sisters, Ezra and Cynthia Kindred, growing up in Maine during the Civil Rights Movement. Griffiths writes, out there in a nation we couldn't fully comprehend, Black swarms marched unafraid. They sang of freedom, lifted their sweet bodies into dark picket lines, danced between fatal crossfires. The book is now available in paperback. Rachel Eliza Griffiths, good morning to you. This book is so beautifully written. You said that you worked on this really for about 10 years. Yes. And this idea of promise, you know, that's the title of the book, but the promises that we see that are trying to be kept by families, by those who love us. What was the inspiration?
The inspiration for me was the word itself. And it was a word that grew inside me as a child because people would promise you things and make promises and keep promises, or promises were broken. And I began to just think about this word all of the time, but what is it? What is it really? So I think many writers begin with a question. And for me, the question of what does promise mean, or someone is of promise, or something is promising. And I started to think about that word and Black girls and Black women.
And you also say this is somewhat of a love letter to those who inspired you, be it your mother, yes, the women around you. Talk to us about why it was so important to even use the characters that you're using, you know, these two sisters, and then Ruby, which we'll get to in a second, when it comes to sort of paying homage to those sacrifices a lot of women make, but also to the importance of having that type of book for women as a love letter.
I love how you put that. I mean, it's just my love letter to Black womanhood and kind of being a girl. And I was the kind of girl where I was in the library, I was in the kitchen with my mother, I was going around the neighborhood. Black women were making bread, they were sewing their own clothes, they were musicians, they were this extended village in a way, with all of these gifts. And they had sacrifices, but they also had joys and imagination and invention of things that they would make. You know, I made this, I put this together. And so for me, when I think about Promise, which is a difficult and hard book, there is also a lot of joy in it. And it allowed me to celebrate a kind of quilt of Black women who had raised me or been my sisters, or that I'd seen out in the world as figures that were kind of offered to me as a map of survival and happiness and fulfillment. And that is a very complicated idea because it isn't just happiness, but there is sacrifice and there is trauma and there is vulnerability and pain.
And let's talk about trauma and vulnerability and pain. Miss Ruby, who is,
Ruby.
Yeah, I guess today we would call her a frenemy, but she's a little white friend of one of the sisters. But she clearly likes them, but she also resents them. It's very interesting to see the dynamic that she brought to the family. And she was also described as a poor white girl in the book. Compared to them, even though they were not as well off, they still had a nuclear family unit that she seemed to covet.
Yes.
Why did you want to include her? I struggled with Ruby.
I struggled with Ruby,
at
too.
the core, she seems like she's trying.
Yeah.
Yes.
You almost
Yes.
can't help but for somebody to end up the way that she does.
Yeah.
Because of her own background.
And that was fascinating to me with her character, because I was saying to you earlier in a conversation, Ruby was really loud and kind of wanting to take over the book. And I was like, girl, you got to sit down over here for a minute, you know.
You actually heard Ruby as you were writing?
Yes.
Yeah.
And she just had a lot to say. And I'm like, this girl is talking a lot. I'm going to turn the volume down. So with Ruby, however, you know, this issue I wanted to think about in my own life, too, is kind of class. And what the intersection of class and race and girlhood, how do those things happen? And how do they happen in landscape? How does class affect what we promise our children, or things that are promised to us, what we will receive or not receive? So Ruby, in a way, is almost the opposite, very much so, of the Kindred family. Ruby is wild, she's in the mountains, she's kind of her own mother, she's her own father.
She has a journey, Ruby.
and she believes in this freedom that is actually really naive. And so she's almost illiterate in a way, and yet she starts to learn that she's white.
Right.
And that is something.
Can I ask you really quickly before we go, the character of Cynthia, there's some autobiographical elements to her.
Yes.
What did you, I know authors don't like to say, oh, that's me, but how much of her is you?
Cynthia is so much of me. She is a love letter to me. She is very, very much my inner child and my daughter.
Wow. Well, we love it. Rachel Eliza Griffiths, we thank you so much for joining us. The paperback edition of Promise is on sale today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.